Okay. We're shrinking here. Getting less and less. Okay. So, before we move on, I want to make sure that everybody, nobody has any questions on the fourth step. Does anybody have a question on that, on what we've done on that? We explained the columns and how you analyze it last week. So if you missed that, you can catch the video. But does that make sense to you guys? Everybody understand that? Everybody okay with that? Okay. Well, then let's move on. Page 72. So now he's talking about having made our personal inventory, what shall we do about it? Been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and to discover the obstacles in our path. We have admitted certain defects. We have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. We put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Now these are about to be cast off. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our defects. So this brings us to step 5. So you might wonder why again, the fourth step sheets and how you analyze them is last week's video. If you missed it, watch that because it's very helpful. Okay, so on step 5, admit to God, to ourselves, to another human being. So I think the reason we admit to God is for forgiveness, and to ourselves for understanding, and to others for humility. So remember when we did the triangle at the first week, and I said one of the things was to learn to love and to serve. Well, that's what this is. We admit to God to love, to ourselves to learn, and to others to serve. So one of the things I want to point out too, in your 12 and 12,
Forgiveness, self-understanding, other
humility. Humility. On page 57 in the 12 and 12, towards the bottom of the page, it says, until we have talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing. And I'm just pointing it out because the literature is telling us not only do we do fifth steps, but we need to listen to fifth step. We need to listen to somebody else's fifth step. And that's where it's telling us to do that right there. Okay. And then
So 57?
page 57 in the 12 and 12, towards the bottom of the page. Step 5 in the 12 and 12, towards the bottom of the page, it says, until we have talked with complete candor of our conflicts and had listened to someone else do the same thing. So it's telling us we do fifth steps and then we listen to fifth steps. It's not optional. That's something we need to do. On page 58, the first paragraph from the 12 and 12 says, another great dividend we may expect from confiding our defects to another human being is humility, a word often misunderstood. And this is going to give you a great definition of the word humility. Okay? To those who have made progress in AA, it amounts to a clear recognition of what and who we really are, followed by a sincere attempt to become what we could be. So that's a great definition for the word humility. Now, the way I work with people when we're going over their fourth step, I'm doing a lot of their fifth step with them. So by the time they're finished with their fourth step, I don't have really very much to go over with them. We sit down and and the first thing I usually ask them is, okay, what haven't you been honest about yet? What haven't you shared yet? Because mostly everything is already done through the process of the fourth step. So that's the way I do it. So the book is telling you that we need to talk to another human being. So really, there's not a lot to go over here. There's 8 things that the book is telling us to do in step 5. So let's see here. Page, I think it's 72 in our book. So on page 75, second paragraph says, we pocket our pride and go to it, illuminating every twist of character, every dark cranny of the past. Once we have taken this step withholding nothing, we are delighted. We can look the world in the eye. We can be alone at perfect peace and ease. Our fears fall from us. We begin to feel the nearness of our Creator. We may have certain spiritual beliefs, but now we begin to have a spiritual experience. The feeling that the drink problem has disappeared will often come strongly. We feel that we are on a broad highway, walking hand in hand with the spirit of the universe. Now, I want to share with you that that was not my experience after my 5th step. I was very paranoid, and it was quite a while before I felt okay. A couple of months at least before I felt okay after sharing it. And I did my 5th step with half of it with my sponsor, another half with a priest. And I tell you a funny story. What happened? I did my 5th step with a priest. All the bad stuff that I wasn't going to share with somebody else, and then the next day I'm in my neighborhood. I'm sitting on the sidewalk at a cafe, talking to a friend of mine. We're drinking espressos, and there's all one-way streets where I'm from. An old habit. I'm always watching everything. And so I'm watching from up the block this unmarked police car come on the block, and I'm thinking, And then he double parks in front of the place, and I'm thinking, first thing I thought was that fucking priest gave me up. And I'm thinking, should I get up and run? And the 2 detectives get out of the car and they start walking in. They look at me and my friend sitting at the table, and they go inside. They get their coffee and they come out and they get in their car and they go, and they have nothing to do with me. But I had that paranoia for a long time after my 5th step. I didn't feel at peace with myself and one with the world. I felt very, difficult. Okay. So back to page 75, down in the last paragraph, then says, so here's 8 things that it's telling us to do. Okay. The first thing is, returning home, we find a place where we could be quiet for an hour, carefully reviewing what we have done. So that's the first thing it's asking us to do. The second thing is, we thank God from the bottom of our heart that we know Him better. And the third thing is, taking this book down from our shelf, we turn to the page which contains the 12 steps. The fourth thing is, carefully reading the first 5 proposals, we ask if we have omitted anything, for we are building an arch through which we shall walk a free man at last. And the fifth thing is our work solid so far? The 6th thing is, are the stones properly in place? The 7th thing is, have we skimped on the cement put in the foundation? Have we tried to make mortar without sand? That's the 8th thing, right? So the first thing is, did I wholeheartedly fully concede to my innermost self back in step one? Okay, we did an exercise that helped us do that, right? And the second step, did I make a relationship with God? Did I start a relationship with God? And the third step, what am I really convinced that any life run on self-will could hardly be a success? And my fourth step, did I really do a fearless and moral inventory? And then the fifth step, was I honest? Or a lot of times we want to try to save our ass and our face at the same time. It don't work. You have to just put yourself out there. So I need to carefully go over these things and ask myself that.
Can you repeat where you just read from?
Page 75, the last paragraph, starting with returning home.
Hey,
Yep. Okay. So if I can honestly say I did all that, then on page 76 it says, if we can answer to our satisfaction, then we look at step 6. Okay. Now, 6 and 7 is where all the tough work really goes on. It's our literature talks about it's the step that separates the men from the boys, right? Or the women from the girls. Why does it say that? Why do you think it says that? Why do you think it talks about this the step that separates the men from the boys? Because the reason for that is because he knows us. He knew how we are. We're people that don't really want to grow up. People like us, when we come in here, we don't really want to grow up. We don't really want to wake up. We want to stay asleep. We want to stay back, where things are comfortable, right? Because even the insane life we were living is more comfortable than the unknown of sobriety without medication, right? So this is the step that separates the men from the boys, because this is now where we have to start growing up. And we have to be honest and take a look at ourselves and do some hard work. Okay? Now, obviously, it's easy to see that there's only 2 paragraphs in step 6 and 7. And people wrongly believe that this is the step that in step 6 and 7 that I don't have to do the work. It's God's job to remove the defects from me. Because the book says that, right? That it says step 6, we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So people will say, you see, it's God's job to remove the defects. And it is God's job. But they're missing a big part of that step. We were entirely ready. So we need to become entirely ready. So there is a lot of work that we have to do in 6 and 7. People think we just pray and ask God to remove the defect. It's kind of like the same thing of when we got sober. We couldn't just pray to God to make us sober, right? It's kind of like locking yourself in the closet, and when you get real hungry, pray for something to eat, You got to get out of the closet. You got to go and get something to eat. And if we're going to stop drinking and doing drugs, we got to do more than pray about that. We have to stop drinking and stop doing drugs in order to become sober, right? And here in 6 and 7, entirely ready is action. Entirely ready is about work that I do. That it does not say that we ask God to remove our defects of character. It doesn't say that. Or it doesn't say that God removes our defects of character. It says we were entirely ready to have God remove these defects of character. So that's a big part of the step that people leave out when they talk about it's God's job to remove the defects. It's not. It's our job to show God that we're entirely ready. So how do we do that? Well, we're going to do an exercise that we're going to, when you did your fourth step, you got a good idea of what your defects of character are. But when you sit down with your sponsor, you could make a list from your most glaring and glaring defects, starting with your most glaring and glaring to your least, and then on opposite of that, write down the opposite of each defect. This is very important because step 6 is an act of defiance and step 7 is an act of submission. Step 6 is an act of defiance and step 7 is an act of submission. I'm going to slay the defect with non-action and I'm going to change the defect with action. So it kind of breaks down to stop doing what I want to do and make myself do what I don't want to do. That is change. That brings change. If I stop doing what I want to do and make myself do what I don't want to do, that produces change. And this is all the meat of the program of recovery here. Because until we get to this point, and don't forget, when we finish these 2 steps, we have finished the process of recovery. Remember, we talked about that, right? The process of recovery is the first 7 steps. So once we finish these 2, we should have overcome or gotten rid of the anchor of whatever it is we're working the steps on.
It's a phrase that says from common sense it become uncommon sense.
Yes, common sense will become uncommon sense. That's right. Because everything is changing for us, right? So let's read. Well, the next paragraph on page 76 is the 7-step prayer. We all know that one, right? It says we have then completed step 7. Well, we've completed step 7 for us to start step 8, but we haven't completed step 7 where we don't ever do it again. Okay, and we just completed it to move on to step 8. But as we continue through the steps, we keep doing 6 and 7.
Step 6, the act of defiance, kind of explain, what is?
Okay, yeah, good question. Good question. She's asking me what I mean by step 6 being the act of defiance. Is I'm going to deny myself what I want or what I want to do. And that's defiance, right? And submission is I'm going to give in to myself to what I really don't want to do. So I'll give you an example. A good example was some years ago, I was going into the shower and I got a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I thought, oh God, you got so fat. And what I saw in myself was, what's the right word? I was not happy with what I saw. I was getting fat. And so in order to lose weight, we have to do exactly what we do to change our defects. In order to lose weight, I have to deny myself. The act of defiance is of not eating what I want to eat, like a 7-layer chocolate cake. No, because I'm alcoholic. I don't want one piece. I want the whole freaking thing, right? And then I have to make myself eat what I don't really want to eat, like a salad. So I don't do what I want to do. I make myself do what I don't want to do, and that produces change. Does that make sense to you? So the defiance is not doing what I want, and the submission is submitting to what I don't want to do. Okay?
Against my will.
Acts against my will is exactly right. Because acts against my will winds up turning out to be aligning myself with God's will. Because all of my acts of will were not God's will. Huh? Yeah, a lot of people hope that. That's why they never change. As long as I persist on taking wrong actions, I'm going to get wrong results. So I have to identify the problem and I have to admit I'm doing the wrong thing before I can accept new decisions or make changes in my life. Okay. Somebody could be standing right next to me yelling, telling me I'm doing it wrong, but I can't hear them. Right? Because we get so caught up in the problem, that all we can seem to do is try harder. Right? Try to squeeze that circle into that square. So I try to get the wrong method to bring the right results by doing it harder. That doesn't work. There's that old joke where the guy had two horses and he called his son. He says, I can't tell the difference. They've got, so the son said, well, why don't you like cut the mane on one of them? So he says, okay, I'll do that. So, and then son called him a week later. So he says, I still can't tell the difference. And he says, well, why don't you, trim trim his hair here. And then, so he did all that. And why don't you still couldn't tell, why don't you put different shoes on him? So he did all that. And son calls him back again. He says, well, Dad, he says, you got the horse thing figured out? He says, I still can't figure out. He says, but I think I got it now. He said, the white one is about an inch or two taller than the black one. All right. We get so caught up on what the problem is, we don't understand, right? We get stuck. So if you want to buy a new car, what's the first thing you have to do? No, besides the money. Let's assume you have the money.
Yeah, I'm like, are we finding?
Get a driver's license. Okay, let's assume you have money and a driver's license. What do you have to do? Huh? Research. Okay. Before you do all that stuff, though, there's one thing that you have to do. You have to realize that this car that you have is not for you no more. Once you get to the point that what you got is not what you want anymore, now you can get something different. You see, because in recovery, or in life, but especially in recovery, we get to create whoever we want to be. We can become whoever we want to be here in recovery. But in order to do that, we first have to experience who we don't want to be. And once we experience who we don't want to be, we can now become whoever we want to be. That's what recovery is about. That's what 6 and 7 is about. It's about change. Did I tell you the story about how they catch monkeys out in South America? Did I tell you that story?
No.
No? So I saw this on the Animal Planet one time years ago, and it was so interesting to me that I've been using it ever since in recovery. Because what they were doing down there, the natives were climbing the trees in the jungle, and they would notch out a little hole in the tree, and they'd take a stick and they put some food on, and they put it in that hole, and they'd pull the stick out, and they'd leave. And a little while later, the monkeys would come. They'd climb the tree, and the monkey would stick his hand in there, grab the food, and he was stuck. And the natives would come back, and they'd throw a net over him, and they'd capture him. That's how they captured the monkey. But while I was watching this on the Animal Planet, I realized, holy shit, I've been that friggin' monkey my whole life. Because all I had to do, and all the monkey had to do, was let go, and he would have been free. If he would have let go, he would have been free. How many times have you been holding on to something that you didn't let go of it and you were stuck? Right? So in order to be free, you got to let go. God has some beautiful gifts for you, but you can't receive them because your hands are full. You got to let go of what you got in order to get something new. That's what we're talking about here in recovery. Another thing I saw on the Animal Channel, I love the Animal Channel. This is all true, right? Do you know how a lobster grows? Yes, a lobster grows in the water. Yes. Yeah. Well, when a lobster needs to expand, right, his shell doesn't expand. No, he goes kind of, but in order for him to do that, he goes deep down into the water, into the rocks. He goes in the rocks, and he gets the shell off, and then he stays down there for protection for a while, for a couple of days, because until he grows a new shell. You see, but in order for him to grow, he's got to get rid of his shell. If he doesn't get rid of his shell, he can't grow. And you can't grow either unless you get rid of your shell. Huh? I don't know. No, they didn't go into that. I think they were selling them. They were selling them, yeah. Crabs, they do the same thing? Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I guess we could learn a lot from the animals, can't we? Yeah. Now here's another good one here. This is not animal though. Do you know that the United States spent literally millions of dollars in the late 60s? And they were trying to invent a pen that they could take in space and write in space, with the gravity and everything, the no gravity. They spent literally millions of dollars, which was a lot of money back in the 60s, right? And they spent all this money trying to invent a pen. You know what the Russians did? They took a pencil. Yeah, they did. They took a pencil up in space, right? Solved the problem. So once again, we're looking at what we think the problem is and trying to fix the problem, and we never get into the solution because we don't really understand what the problem is. So we have gone through the first 5 steps. We have a real good understanding of what our problem is. Okay. And so now we're able to change.
For example,
Set aside prayer is great. Yeah. We started off this thing with the set aside prayer. So recovery is not based on time. It's based on a desire to change and a willingness to take action. And change is the name of the game. We're gonna see that. Here's the problem with change. Everyone thinks change is based on what you're going to get. If I'm going to change, if I'm going to do this, what's in it for me? Right? That's real common, normal thinking, isn't it? I'm going to change. So what do I get if I change? But here in recovery, what we're talking about, it's not about, we don't change for what we're going to get. The change is about what we're willing to let go of. Like the monkey, right? What are we willing to let go of? There's been, I think Joe and Charlie used to talk about the hot air balloon, right? But you got to get rid of the sand for it to go up. So all the change that comes about through God working in our lives is by our consent and our permission. I want to say that again because that's important. All the change that comes about through God working in our lives is by our consent and our permission. Just my notes. All the change that comes about through God working in our lives is by our consent and our permission. All the growth that happens through our will and our consent. We have to make the decision. We have to become willing and ready. Entirely, yeah.
And then the next one you said, well,
All the growth that happens through our consent and our permission. See, when I got here, I thought recovery was about how I feel. But recovery is not about how I feel. It's about what I do in spite of how I feel. That's what recovery is really about. In spite of how I feel, what do I do?
Don't punch people in the face.
Don't punch people in the face. That helps. Be nice.
not about how I feel, it's about what?
It's about what I do in spite of how I feel. Yeah. Yeah. I've never been in front of a judge and he sentenced me on how I feel. He's always sentenced me on what I did.
So then the man gets to the point where, you know, past is past, it's all done for, and he wants to get a date, like, you know, like nothing ever happened. Can he be that guy?
You can certainly change, sure.
No, I didn't ask that question. I said, can speed like new man?
A new man.
Yeah, new man.
You have to change to be a new man. You can't be the same person and be a new man. You have to change. So my answer was to answer to your question that you can certainly change. If once you change, you can become a new man. That's right. And you have to be willing and ready to do all that. And you can't just think about it or feel that's what you want. It's about action. So step 6 and 7 is years ago. Was speaking at a convention, and Joe and Charlie was speaking Saturday night. I was speaking Friday night, so I got to hang out with them for the weekend. And I asked them about step 6 and 7. I said, Joe, why is it only the 2 paragraphs there? And why doesn't it go deeper into it? He said, that's why Bill wrote 6 and 7 for the 12 and 12. I think 6 and 7 and 12 and 12 is our most profound writing that we have in all our literature. But what Joe told me was 6 and 7, he said, Danny, 6 and 7 is like you go to the hardware store and you buy a pick and a shovel. It doesn't come with any directions. You just go out there and you start picking and digging and picking and digging. Recovery is about uncover, discover, discard. I think we said that last week.
Yeah.
But again, recovery is about uncover, discover, discard. So when I do 6 and 7, I start listing my defects and I take one. Here's a good way to practice 6 and 7 and I'll tell you what I do now. Probably for the last 20 years, I've been doing this. I take 6 and 7 and I put it in my 11th step. Now, so my first 15 years or so, I didn't do that, but that's what I do now on a regular basis. So what I do in the morning when I do my 11th step is I'm not really big on meditation and all that stuff, but I do ask God to give me awareness on the defect that I'm working on and awareness of the opposite of that defect. And then I try my hardest throughout the day to not do that defect. Don't do what you want to do. And to make myself do the opposite of that defect every chance I get. Make myself do what I don't want to do. Right? So that's how I do that every morning in my 11th step. But if you just want to work your 6 and 7 step, then you still have to write down what your defect is and what the opposite is. And 6 is stop doing that. And 7 is start doing the opposite of that. That's your act of defiance and your act of submission again, right? That's how that is. And that is about change. That will produce change. Because when you don't do what you want to do, that's change right there. And then you make yourself do what you don't want to do. You're talking about change. And if you continuously do that, you will change. Your whole life's going to change. Your whole attitude is going to change. Your actual character of who you are changes. You know, there's actual change in character in the big book about Alcoholics Anonymous, which it shows us that we've changed.
I think it's kind of like what we learned early on, you know, where we get the knowledge.
That's right.
You know, I think for preachers would have practice something over eventually become part of life. Like before making my bed, brushing my teeth, none of that was habits to me. I could have been in a hotel room. Even if I'm gonna leave that day, I go, I'm gonna make the bed, you know, because it's just a habit. And when we
You
do
make your bed in a
something-
hotel room?
Yeah.
But you're so right, Kelly. You're absolutely right, though. You're absolutely right, except for the hotel part. But here's the thing, right? That's exactly correct. Okay? Because let's say you take a little boy, for instance, at 3, 4 years old. And now every day you give him a basketball and you take him outside and you teach him how to dribble and how to play basketball. Every day. Spend a little time every day with this little kid. As he grows up, you still teach him every day. You know what? When he grows up, he's not going to grow up to be a hockey player. Because we are what we do. This goes to the same thing about not what I feel, not about what I feel, right? We are what we do. So these defects of character that we have, you see, they're defects of character, right? If there were no defects of character when I got here, I wouldn't have had character at all. All I had was defects of character. But they were very much so character because they've been honed in and they've been worked over and part of me. So what we have to do is we have to reverse that. And how do we do that? We don't do what we want to do. We make ourselves do what we don't want to do. And eventually, so I'm from the streets, right? When I got sober, I, honest to God, could not speak a sentence without cursing. It was just natural for me to curse I mean, sailors didn't even curse the way tonight. It was just natural for me. Every other word was a curse word. I literally had to spend a few years honing that, not making myself do that, and making myself say something different. Today, I curse occasionally, but nothing like what I was when I got here. No, and I put up here, serenity is not freedom from the storm, but peace amid the storm, right? We went over the third step promise, remember? That God's going to allow you to match calamity with serenity. That's what this is talking about. So we've got some tools from the first 5 steps. Now we need to utilize them to finish this process of recovery, right? And when we finish the 7th step, we will have recovered from whatever we're working the steps on. And we talked about this before. There's other things we need to do. There's more steps we need to do, but so remember, we talked about what change is about. Change is about not what am I going to get, but what am I willing to let go of. So we have to use the same process to change, like the little boy playing basketball every day, right? He grows up, he plays basketball. So now we have to change. Whatever this defect is that I do naturally, normally, and instinctively, I have to stop doing. So I have to be aware of it. That's why I like to bring this into my 11th step, because I ask God in the morning to give me awareness on this stuff. All right. So and guess what? When you ask God to give you awareness on something, you know what happens? You get awareness. He gives you awareness. So now, going through the day, I go, oh, it's like we talked about some weeks ago, inches and seconds, right? We stop because when something's happening, I know what that's about. That's not where I want to go. I don't want to live like that today. And it changed. Eventually, you will change. Eventually, you'll not be doing these defects and you'll have assets. This is why, remember when we did the 4-step, I said to you, do not inventory anything good. Right? There's nowhere in our book that tells us to inventory good stuff in the 4th step. But the first time it tells us that is in step 10. Step 10 says, a continuous look at our assets and liabilities, and a real desire to learn and grow by this means are necessities for us. So the first time it tells us to look at good things that we do is in the 10th step. Because by the time we get to the 10th step, we should have a list of assets now. If you came here bankrupt on assets like I did, I tell you, I had 1 or 2 things. I was always kind to my elders, and I think that's about it. Everybody else was a victim, yeah. But yeah, so but by the time I got to step 10, a year sober, not even, I had some assets. I was spiritually growing. And what happens is, you start feeling good about yourself. And, if you're anything like a good alcoholic or a good addict, when you feel good, you want to feel more good. You want to feel gooder.
That is not for
You want to feel gooder.
I love my wife. I think I need to say, it's very important to say something. I love her so much. And she's not coming back to me until I stop drinking. And I tiptoed like across every bronze suit, like no man you ever knew. But she's a good girl, and I love my wife. And I'm bad, but I'm not bad. And so the way you're thinking about a man is not really how a man is.
Okay, hold it. Let me stop you. No, let me stop you, because what you're doing is you're putting your sick thinking into my words. Okay? And you need to stop doing that. Your life and your thinking is very at the beginning of sobriety. You have no serenity in you yet. So don't tell me that what I'm saying is not right. It's not right for you because you're not right that. I don't want to hear no more. I don't want to hear no more from you. I don't want to hear no more from you. You stop now. You stop now. And when you come here, don't be drunk.